Hi, I'm Baruch Bush, Professor of Law at Hofstra Law School in New York, and also President of the Institute for the Study of Conflict Transformation, the organization that has produced the videotape that you're watching, that you've actually finished watching, as part of a series of videotapes that we produced illustrating transformative mediation as it's used in different cases and by different mediators. This particular tape is a step forward for us because, as you've seen, it involves the participation of attorneys representing their clients in mediation in front of a transformative mediator, and it involves a commercial dispute. And this is the first tape that we've done that has these two features, which have turned out to be quite interesting, as you've seen in the tape that you've watched. Now, what I'm going to do together with my colleagues, Bob Haskins, Ritu Gill, and the mediator, Jody Miller, all of whom you've met and seen in the mediation, we're going to discuss that mediation and have some dialogue about some of the events that happened in it and how they unfolded, and especially how they are perceived from the point of view of lawyers participating in transformative mediation, representing clients in transformative mediation. Bob and Ritu are not going to be in role here, so they're speaking for themselves as lawyers, and both of them are lawyers. They'll introduce themselves in a moment. But they're going to speak about the events of the mediation that happened from their perspective in the role play. And Jody's also going to speak about what happened in the role play from her perspective as mediator. So let me ask, before we go further, for the three of you to say a couple of words about yourselves. Jody, you want to start?
Thank you, Brooke. I am Jody Miller. I'm the Executive Director of the Mediation Center in Dutchess County here in Poughkeepsie, New York. And I'm also a fellow with the Institute for the Study of Conflict Transformation. And I've been a practicing transformative mediator now for over 10 years. Our center practices transformative mediation solely in all of the types of cases that we do. And I look forward to this discussion and thank Bob and Ritu for being part of this project.
I'm Bob Haskins. I'm an attorney in Poughkeepsie, New York presently. I've been practicing for approximately 30 years at this point with a practice that focuses on malpractice litigation, predominantly defense malpractice litigation. I do a certain amount of personal injury work also. My experience as far as commercial transactions has come mostly through my work as a mediation center. I've trained as a transformative mediator and have worked with the mediation center here. And we've done a lot of small claims cases and such with commercial circumstances and disagreements. So it was interesting for me to get the chance to participate in this, which sort of drew all of this together for me.
Ritu.
I'm Ritu Gill. I'm also an attorney. I formerly practiced for a large law firm in New York City as well as a smaller firm subsequent to that. My expertise was in litigation. Both firms dealt with very, very complex commercial cases, securities law cases, and the like that were very lengthy, protracted litigation. I no longer am practicing law. I've instead turned to transformative mediation as the next step in something I'm interested in, and I have been trained as a transformative mediator also.
Two things were sort of striking in watching this mediation, as I did, as the viewers of this commentary are going to have done. And one is that this case got very heated very quickly. Kathy, your client, sort of went from 0 to 60 very fast and stayed at 60 or more than 60 for a long time. Is that, in your experience of mediation involving business parties, commercial parties, is that realistic? Was this a realistic mediation in the sense that do business people in commercial cases get so worked up about any aspect of the case as we saw Kathy doing in this case?
I think in commercial cases a dispute is a dispute, and they may behave differently in commercial cases as opposed to non-commercial, but I think emotions can run just as high in commercial cases. It's a tense situation, it's a confrontational situation. My client was very expressive. Are they always that expressive? Not necessarily, but I think emotions can run the gamut, and you can have really strong feelings in commercial cases as well. And this being an exercise in transformative mediation, I think dealing with that emotion is important, how we dealt with it.
Things can reach a different level when you have a client who has a personal interest involved. But by the same token, I've been involved in more directive types of mediations where it was just attorneys, where I've seen some of the attorneys become quite exercised about the whole process, really letting their emotions spill out in a circumstance where you would think that you would just be having the rational discussion between two attorneys. Right. So it's an interesting process to see, but it certainly occurs, and how it's managed and how things proceed thereafter, whether the experience just becomes an occasion to vent emotions or whether it becomes an occasion for discussion, whether it makes that transition, that's the key to the outcome.
And it's interesting that, I look at this both as someone who's taught and done and studied transformative mediation and mediation in general a lot, and conflict. And in general, I think the sort of standard assumption is that if it's a commercial case, emotions really are not that important.
But it's a myth. It's an absolute myth. Okay. I think in commercial cases, the parties are as invested. These are people's jobs that are involved. Right. And so there is some even personal stake.
Sure. And
so,
in this case, it was about really a personal business, both for Kathy and for your client, for Tom.
Exactly.
They were very identified with their business and what the effects were of this conflict on their business and them, their identity.
Now, these are a couple of small businesses, so you can say the identity was very close between the person and the business. Even in larger cases where you've got corporations involved, the emotions can be high.
Right. Exactly. It's not just an abstract, a transactional thing, it's a personal thing.
Right.
The other sort of aspect of what happened here was the way in which the first long part of the session really focused on something that wasn't a substantive issue at all about this case, and that was who's going to talk to who. And Kathy's insistence that Tom should speak directly to her, and your insistence, Bob, that you're there representing Tom and that you're speaking for Tom. Is this something that frequently happens, that people get involved, especially in the beginning of mediation, in an argument about process, in effect?
Since she's my client, I'll go ahead and address it and start. Sure. I made the choice to allow her to do that because I knew that this was a mediation and not a litigation. And I wanted to support her desire to talk to Tom directly. So I thought, we can always fight it out later in a litigation, but this is a mediation where the whole purpose of it is for the parties to have a conversation. So I made the choice to let her do that.
Okay. What do you think?
I think that that's true. It's very frequent, particularly in a mediation, where people aren't really sure what they're doing or where they're going. So there needs to be time spent where people are adjusting to their roles, sorting out what their expectations are and where they want the process to go. In this case, Kathy wanted the process to go with talking. Now, certainly my expectation as the attorney on the other side was far from that. My expectation going into it was that I was going to be overseeing a negotiation to resolve this problem. So there needed to be a whole redefinition process taking place here before the actual discussion could really move forward.
Jody, let me bring you into this in terms of the cases that you've mediated, and I know you've mediated other cases, real cases, involving lawyers. This was also, not a huge stakes case, but it was a high stakes case. There were a lawsuit for $1 million, substantial property damages, injuries to children, letters in the community assailing somebody's reputation. This was not a small stakes case. You've mediated other cases, commercial cases, where there were fairly high stakes. Does the procedure, the mechanics, become an issue that the parties get wrapped up in?
I have seen attorneys spend quite a bit of time at the beginning if the parties aren't talking, their clients aren't talking, but the attorneys are talking about how to work with something, such as confidentiality. Well, the judge has sent us here, and I've mediated I remember one case in particular where there were 6 attorneys involved, and really having a lengthy discussion, at least 20 minutes in the beginning, if not longer, about how confidentiality was going to be handled. What did that mean? Were they free to say whatever they needed to say? Was this going back to the judge? So they had to really work through that themselves because the confidentiality wasn't on them, it was on the mediator. So they spent quite a bit of time talking about that before they could talk about anything else, because they really needed to know where they stood in regard to what they were going to say as whether or not it was confidential.
I'm surprised sometimes that people think this is unusual, that parties should get wrapped up in the how of things as opposed to the what of things, as it happened here.
Particularly when most lawyers don't do that many mediations. And for many coming in, it's a new experience. So understanding the process is very important, and it naturally is going to take a significant amount of time.
In some ways, the reason that procedural discussion, if we can call it that, took such a long chunk of this mediation is that the mediator didn't do anything to constrain that. And I can imagine mediations where a mediator would have said, well, this is all very good. You disagree about this. Let me make a suggestion. Or let's have a caucus and talk to both parties and try to push that forward more quickly. Whereas, Jody, you really did I'm not sure nothing, but very little. You did a lot to support that discussion in reflecting what was being said and summarizing the differences that were emerging, just the kind of things we'd expect you to do as a transformative mediator. But none of them were directed at moving it forward more quickly. So one can imagine a mediator taking a firmer hand on that and pushing it forward, getting to a resolution of the procedural issue more quickly. But I'm going to ask Bob and Ritu, what was your sense as you were sitting there involved in this of Jody's non-directiveness?
Jody set the expectations during the intake sessions. So I think in the intake sessions she did say, I'm here to support you, but I'm not going to be directing the conversation.
Were you as a lawyer happy that the mediator was allowing this to run its course, allowing the procedural conversation, the question of was Tom going to talk directly to Kathy or not? Was that okay with you? Was it a good thing with you that Jody was not trying to corral the two of you into a more...
It was okay with me, but only to a limited extent, because after a while, I actually felt, even as Kathy's lawyer, that her rant was going on too long, and it was unproductive, which is why in the second half of the exercise, I called for a break so that I could talk to my client. So since the mediator did not step up to do anything about the rant or direct it or move the conversation forward, I was getting a little bit frustrated with my own client. I didn't necessarily pin it on the mediator, but I didn't like the way it was going.
So in other words, all this time, the questions of the quality of the work, the significance of the warranty, none of this was being discussed. It was just, are you going to talk, am I going to get a chance to talk to your client or just you?
Kathy unloading, yes.
And insisting on the procedural... Is that, again, usual, unusual?
Usually lawyers don't try and hold the field quite to that extent.
Yes, we were very opposite in style, you and I. We were the two opposite examples.
Exactly. You often see individuals when they're, with a small business owner and a person who's a client or customer or such. You see someone they've got their story and they want everyone to agree with their story. And they're going to tell their story however many times it takes until everyone agrees with it. Naturally, the breakthrough there is when there is a conversation that starts rather than them just telling their story over and over. I could see Jody working there then again, by the same token, I do have to agree that, I had a sense of frustration because I was tired of hearing her tell her story over and over again, and I wanted to do, what my perceived job was negotiate something out here, and that was getting in the way of that. If Jody was intervening in a different fashion, I don't know that you would have had the times when we were caucusing with our clients and stepping back, and the process, the whole dynamic is changing there. I don't know if Jody had dealt with things differently, that would have happened.
Well, that's a really nice point. If she had come in more forcefully there, how would you have responded to that? What would have happened if Jody had tried to manage that more directly?
I think that's a real slippery slope kind of circumstance, because once Jody starts making incremental changes in the dynamic like that of the process, you end up at an unnatural point, and that requires more changes. And I think that once she got into that, as far as managing our discussion in that fashion, certainly I don't think it would have proceeded the way it did, which was reaching a point where Tom realized that progress was only going to be made through him talking, and his attorney, me, also realized that if we were going to get anywhere, I was going to have to alter my position as far as how I expected the mediation to unfold, and be willing to be flexible here and to allow an actual conversation.
So you guys did actually, Tom, whispered in your ear, and that's when you asked for that first caucus, or it actually wasn't a caucus with a mediator, a separate meeting, but by yourselves.
Right.
And in that separate meeting by yourselves, you basically sort of said, well, we have to change our game plan. And you asked Tom, are you ready for that? Do you feel comfortable talking on your, for yourself? That's not what we originally planned, but are you okay with it? It seems to me that if Jody had sort of intervened more directly to move the thing forward, that wouldn't have happened.
Correct. I don't believe it would have.
Let me jump in here.
Sure.
Kathy wanted to be heard. One reason why she's repeating her story again and again is because she feels like she's not getting through and not being understood and not getting acknowledgement. The mediator reflected back to show that the mediator, as an intervening mediator, is hearing her and reflecting that back. I don't think it would have been productive, because part of Kathy's goal was not just settlement and money and damages. It was emotional. Part of her goal was emotional. She was angry and she wanted to be heard, and she was upset that the contractor never returned her phone calls. Right. So she wanted to be heard, and she wanted to get through to that contractor. So had the mediator shortcut that process and said, let's move on and let's now talk about settlement, I don't think Kathy would have been very happy about that.
Right.
So
and you did point out a few minutes ago that this sort of overlaps into the other phenomenon that I asked about, heatedness of Kathy's expression right from the very start, and sustained at that level for a very long time.
Yes.
I guess a lot of people watching this tape would think that's the kind of thing, again, that a mediator would normally not permit. Certainly not for that long a time, and not at that level of, to quote you from the session, Bob, vituperativeness. It was pretty astonishing.
Yeah.
The mediator didn't stop that. Didn't tamp it down. Didn't control it. Didn't do anything to constrain it at all. In some ways, you could say the mediator, which is what some folks say about how that works in transformative mediation, fed that fire by reflecting Kathy's anger and summarizing her comments and sharing, making that, amplifying that for Kathy and for everybody else in the room. Were you, Ritu, as Kathy's lawyer, hoping, expecting, wanting Jody to do more to sort of bring it down a level, sort of calm Kathy down?
I mean, my answer is sort of a complicated answer.
Okay.
Because I was there to support Kathy, and Kathy wanted to be heard. She was very upset. She wanted to get through, and she stayed upset because she was not getting the acknowledgement from Tom.
Right.
She was getting it from the mediator through the reflections, and people want to be heard. So the reflections helped in that regard. However, after a point, as I said earlier, I didn't see Kathy shifting, and I felt, okay, this is going on and on and on. And it's not even productive for my client. So I felt that after a while, I was frustrated that we were not moving on, and the mediator was not able to take an approach to move her on, so then I moved her on.
Right. A complicated answer, but a useful one, because in a sense you're saying the same kind of thing that Bob was pointing out, which is, and I'm not sure that Jody was not able to move her on, but that Jody was choosing not to do things that might have moved her on. Am I right about that, Jody? So, which sort of left it to you and your client.
Yes.
It left it to you. And so that eventually what occurred was this second separate meeting, in this case between you and Kathy and Jody, the mediator, and actually it was sort of the conversation between you and your client there, in which you finally were saying, well, I think, it might help if you could take it down a notch. I think that was your expression.
It was.
And Kathy was sort of startled at that in a way. Sort of,
it was.
What? This is me. How can I change who I am?
And I just want to point out that was unplanned. It was a spur of the moment decision. I said, let's stop, let's break. I need to talk to her separately.
Right. So that the mediator's restraint, in a way, of her opportunity to intervene and take a firmer hand, a more controlling hand, created the opportunity for both of you as lawyer-client couples to make choices, hard choices, for yourselves.
Right. For my case, that's exactly what happened.
And that's really, just to emphasize, that's really what transformative mediation is all about. That's the center, that's the core, the opportunity for parties to make their own choices. And Jody's restraint and the kind of way that she did support the conversation created that opportunity and sort of handed the ball to you. And then you both actually did those things. Let me now focus to you, Jody. When that angry conversation was happening, and you did reflect, you did summarize, you did follow Kathy, and none of that changed. Your reflection, which is what people sometimes say about reflection. Why would you want to reflect angry words with angry words? It's just going to add fuel to the fire. Did you ever feel a pull that, wow, this is going too far, I have to stop this, I have to do something about this? Or you were perfectly comfortable in that kind of engagement with her?
I was very comfortable in the engagement with her. In my head, I'm thinking, "Oh wow, she's livid. She's not calming down." But my intervention stayed consistent with reflecting or summarizing, and I did, in looking back, see changes in her after some of those interventions. She would become a little calmer, or a little more specific, or express or explain more about what this experience was for her. And then maybe she would, try to talk to Tom, and she and Bob would get into it again or start talking to each other again. But I didn't plan to or intend to do anything differently because that's where she was. And those things, those interventions are really with the purpose of helping somebody make whatever shifts they can when they can.
Do you worry? Did you worry? Because some of the language that she used, some of the, not just language, but especially language towards you, Bob, as Tom's attorney, in her effort to get you out of the way, she was pretty, persistent and tough and
less than cordial.
Insulting. While she was doing that, Jody, did you have any concern? Well, I better, put the brakes on this because, Bob's going to get up and walk out of the room. Something terrible is going to happen here. These are the kinds of things that people are afraid of, right? In watching and thinking about transformative mediation.
I'm paying attention to, I'm hearing what Kathy's saying, I'm looking to reflect what she's saying, but I'm paying attention to everybody's reactions. Seeing, is this ruffling Bob? Tom's having some little kinks happening or responses to that, but I'm not looking to tone it down or tamp it down or try to put the lid on it. I'm not going to do that.
So you might, for example, be looking for something they want to say about it.
Right.
If
I'm
they're
paying
saying-
attention because if I'm going to summarize, I'm going to include that in the summary. If I'm
Right.
just going to reflect Kathy, then I'm going to focus on Kathy. But I also want to say at the same time, as transformative mediators, we are very committed to those interventions of doing certain things and not other things. At the same time, I'm thinking in my head, wow, she's really angry.
Right.
She said that
Right,
to Bob?
right.
Wow. So I am having my own thoughts about what's happening. It's not that I'm not. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm having an experience of my own, and I'm staying with what my purpose is as the mediator.
Right. So you don't stop being a human being and not having these sort of reactions when people are really dumping on each other. You have those thoughts, but they're over here. You keep, and that's called discipline. That's what discipline means. And a lot of what transformative mediators do is exercise a set of disciplines, and the whole thing is a discipline. What do you think would be the common response of lawyers with the kinds of clients you are representing to that kind of approach by a mediator? Supportive but non-directive approach that Jody took through this whole session.
Well, it's hard to speak for all lawyers across the board and generalize because different lawyers have different expectations, and some might feel very happy that the mediator did not overstep her bounds and make decisions for them. However, and I think I alluded to this earlier, I think there would be a pool of lawyers who would be dissatisfied and who would feel this mediator didn't do anything. That's my suspicion. Is being unfamiliar with transformative mediation, I think they could clearly expect a more directed approach, or a bit more than what happened here.
The potted plant.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. What could we do? Because that's clearly what we're trying to do here with this tape and with the mission of the Institute generally, to change that attitude on the part of lawyers. That the only good mediator is a directive mediator. That a non-directive mediator is a waste of time. Because clearly the two of you found that that approach that Jody took very, very useful and productive for your clients and for you. What do you think, Bob, would be the attitude of most lawyers towards this kind of...
I think the primary stumbling block is attorneys who don't really understand the process, who don't understand what's going on and how it's going on, and who are coming in expecting, because I'm sure there are many attorneys who come in, we want to convince people. We want to convince the mediator. We want the mediator to be on our side.
Right.
We want the mediator to be rooting for us. And, quite honestly, when you've got a mediator who is, not on anybody's side, that can be a little disconcerting. So unless you really understand the process in the first instance going in and are committed to the process,
Right.
it, I would think, can be problematic for attorneys. Are you an egocentric lawyer or are you a client-centric lawyer? If you're a client-centric lawyer, you're looking to have your client happy. Not necessarily, and realistically, it's what the client thinks is best for them.
Right.
If you're an egocentric lawyer, you want to win.
Right.
So when you're going into a circumstance like this, if you're looking towards the client, if you want the client to come out of here with what's best for the client, you have to let the client have the determinative role, rather than you coming in as the attorney and saying, they're going to help me, the mediator is going to help me get what I want for you.
Right. You have to let the client get what they want for themselves, make those decisions, rather than not just you, but also the mediator directing those outcomes, directing those decisions about both outcome and process.
Are you advising
Right.
or are you telling them?
Right. This is a kind of a very interesting insight that comes out of the discussion. One of the central values of doing mediation in this way is placing tremendous value on party self-determination. That one might expect lawyers who understand, like you're suggesting, client-centered lawyers, who also place great value on client decision-making, client self-determination, to appreciate this. But not all lawyers necessarily place that kind of value on client self-determination. So it may be that there's a kind of there's an audience for this. And we have to sort of maybe appeal to that sort of common value between transformative mediation and, in effect, client-centered lawyering, for appealing to an audience that recognizes the value of party self-determination.
Well, I would think that an attorney whose clients, at the end of the process, feel that they controlled what went on, that they had a say, I think they're going to end up being overall happier clients, and clients that are more likely to come back to you the next time something happens, as opposed to someone who felt they had something imposed upon them, either by the mediator or by you or whatever.
Or even their own lawyer can be imposing stuff
Exactly.
on them. In fact, you mentioned that Bob was very ginger in his gingerly. I wouldn't say that. I feel he was respectful of Tom and Tom's feelings, and wanted to work with Tom hand in hand to say, Tom, are you ready?
That's a better way to put it.
Yeah.
Respectful. Let's talk about whether or not this was a successful session and your sort of assessment of the mediator's role in the session globally, generally. This session was about an hour and a half long. It was a case involving, a major lawsuit and reputational concerns and letters of potentially libelous letters out in the community. And by the end of the session, all that had happened, whether money was going to be paid or not was an unsettled question. Whether retractions were going to be made or not was an unsettled question. The only thing that was decided was that everybody agreed to bring a third-party expert, a neutral, impartial third-party expert, into the process to assess what actually was the condition of the building, what needed to be done to make this building safe and usable. That was the outcome. When you looked at that from your point of view as Kathy's and Bob's lawyers, was that a success?
Well, the answer is relative in terms of glass half empty, glass half full. When you have a lot of money on the table and a lot of complicated issues, it's unrealistic to necessarily think that you'll wrap it up and settle it in one shot. They've agreed to move towards that. So to that extent, yes, it was. They've agreed to still put the litigation at rest for the time being and take a baby step forward, get another expert involved. From another perspective, it was successful because there were some empowerment shifts and some recognition shifts and some self-determination. So some of that took place, and so it was successful on that level as well.
Right.
But I would say, there was a step was moved forward. So it was a qualified success.
Right. So that not only was there a step towards a further kind of substantive resolution, but there were also numbers of shifts that occurred for both Kathy and Tom in terms of their feeling more solid and at least beginning to become open somewhat to the other.
Yes, and just to circle back to something you raised earlier, I can say that because I have been educated in transformative mediation.
Right.
So to get back to an earlier point you raised, how will lawyers be more welcoming of this process? Right. They must understand it. They must be educated. They must be clear about the goals, and there's not sufficient understanding about it yet. So some lawyer might think, well, no, I don't care about empowerment and recognition. What's that? I'm here to talk about this fight and this money, and I want my issues resolved. Right. So they may not see that as a success, but I do because I've been educated about transformative mediation.
As an attorney, you can look at this as a success because what you have going on here is a process. And the mediation is only a step in that process. The process started with whatever went on between the two of them, and will continue on until there's a resolution of some sort down the line. What was ongoing was basically a litigational train wreck that was going to end up in court, and everyone was going to beat each other over the head, and something was going to happen, potentially. God only knows what, but something. And the mediation comes in, and the two parties at that point, everything stops. And the two of them see what potentially may be a path out. And they both agree to follow that path, to see whether, in fact, there is a way to step out of this ongoing litigational train wreck and reach something where both of them can walk away with a sense that, they've accomplished something, and that, a determination has been reached that, may not be the ideal determination, but is something that works for them. So certainly from the sense of from the clients, I think that there is good reason to think that something significant was accomplished there, and I think that the attorneys, and any attorneys looking at this, should consider this too if they have the slightest whit of concern for their clients, that, they're being provided with a way to avoid, ending up in a bitter, protracted litigation.
Right.
And how can that not be good?
But it's interesting, and the other piece of that the success is, and you use that language in the case actually towards the end in that problem-solving portion. You kept talking about a path forward, a way to move things forward. And Jody, you were reflecting that at that point, that language. So that path forward is not just a path forward again that was sort of foisted on Kathy and Tom by you, their lawyers, or Jody, the mediator, but it was a path that they actually actively participated in constructing.
Exactly.
And choosing for themselves after hearing themselves and each other. So there was a shift, not just in sort of a step down the road on a different path, but the way in which the parties felt about that shift, the sort of posture that they held themselves as they made that shift. That was very different. They seemed to be, both of them, watching it on tape, the two of them seemed to be happy about where this ended up at the end of this session. I wasn't in the room. I could look at it on tape. Sort of, again, in the role of their lawyers, did you get the sense from your clients? Oh, my client, this is working out well at this point. At this point, baby steps, whatever it is, but they're happy with what occurred here. Was that the sense that you had of where Bob and Kathy were at the end of the session as opposed to the beginning?
Yeah, I thought that Kathy was emotional across the board in a good way too. Yes, she was very angry and very heated, but she also had a big heart, and I almost felt there was sort of a big sigh of relief and almost tears in her eyes. That she could finally be heard and understood, and she started to thank Tom for coming to the table.
Right.
So I felt that the other side of her emotional quotient is she did have a big heart, and she was happy that there was something.
She was actually able to access it.
Yeah.
Access that
Was
part of
that
herself.
was that the subject of that little tete-a-tete that you had with her right at the end there?
Yeah,
she wanted to say something positive to Tom.
Yes,
and,
and this was the lawyer part of me stepped in because I think she wanted to say, I'm willing to do even more now for Tom. Why don't I issue a retraction letter, and why don't I give him this, and why don't I? I'm just like, no, because we still might sue him. So hold off on that.
That's a very interesting thing to have shared now, right?
Yeah.
That's how far she moved. She was,
yes.
Very nice, because we didn't see that on the tape. We knew you were talking about something, but we didn't know. That's very
Yeah, so she wanted to make a further accommodation for him, and I prevented her from doing so that I could protect her interests.
So that Ritu sort of came over to your side over there, the protective side. How about you? And
Certainly Tom. Tom had felt harassed and oppressed by this whole process, to say the least. And for him, I think that there was a significant relief that this is potentially being lifted off of me. That this is not going to be something that I'm just going to be, mired in for the foreseeable future.
Right. I can't help but do this from my sort of theoretical perspective, taking the transformative framework into light here. It's interesting that at the end, both Tom and Kathy seemed to be sort of experiencing a little bit of liberation from this sort of trap of this negative interaction that they were in. That both of them seemed to, like you said, breathe a sigh of relief. They were both sense, wow, we don't have to do this way.
Yeah.
We don't have to be stuck in this sort of strategic game of silence and cursing. there's another way to do this, and that's really what we prefer to do.
Yeah, no matter who's attacking whom, even if it's Kathy attacking Tom, it's unpleasant actually for both parties.
Right.
It's unpleasant. It could not have been easy for Tom to sit there and hear all this about him.
Yeah.
It's also unpleasant for her. So just getting out of that negative space is a release.
Yeah, and they seem to both actually say that at the end of the session. I really want to thank all of you for allowing me to interrogate you like this and dialogue with you about this very interesting mediation session on video, and also for doing it, for allowing people to see here's how mediation might unfold. Might not be like this in every case. Here's how it might unfold with a very skilled, talented, transformative mediator in a commercial dispute, which does have actually personal and emotional dimensions. Surprise, surprise. And this is what we as lawyers think can be useful and productive, and found useful and productive about this. And hopefully this can also be a way to reach out to lawyers to say, actually, clients do value self-determination. They do value having the chance to make their own decisions and to express themselves and to find a different way to relate to their counterparts that doesn't involve the kind of negativity and bitterness that often transpires in these cases, and they find a path not just towards a solution, but they find a path out of that as well.
Which helps them. Forget about the conflict of the other party. They feel better.
That's right.
Of course.
That's right. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
We enjoyed it. Thank you so much.